Okay, so lecture 7, overview of emotions. All right. What is an emotion? Emotions are described as feeling states. Current day cognitive neuroscience view emotions as consisting of three components that can be studied independently: behavior, physiology, which is like automatic nervous system output, and feelings, which are subjective conscious experiences. Emotions are functional. They're neurally based dispositions that facilitate appropriate responses to events of biological significance, increasing our evolutionary fitness, including like the fight or flight response or something, and getting away from fear. Autonomic mobilization, increased heart rate and blood pressure, etc. Fear might be important for learning to avoid similar situations in the future. So the overlapping of behavior, physiology, and feelings is emotion. Okay, so emotions are typically triggered by a particular event and are short-lived, seconds to minutes. Emotional states that endure for longer periods are moods. Example, mood disorders. Affect is typically the same as emotion. So affect is the same thing as emotion. Affect, emotion, affect, emotion, affect, emotion. I mean, that makes sense because something would happen, that would be the cause, and then the effect would be emotion, but this is affect with an A. But, so affect. But it is most commonly used to describe outward expression of emotions, like facial expressions, gesture. Okay, so like someone hits you, you frown. That's the affect. Temperament refers to someone's enduring disposition, a personality trait, experience, and react to events in certain ways. So like an angry temperament. Like Elliot had an angry temperament. Okay. Motivation describes an urge to reduce drives. And example, one is motivated to eat in order to reduce hunger. However, motives can also be more lofty and very long term, such as motive to graduate with honors. Many of these interact with each other and influence emotional responses. Emotional influence on brain processes and behavior occur at varying timescales. Immediate effect via neural signaling are captured more easily, and indirect and slower effects stemming from hormonal action. So hormonal action can slowly affect emotion. Furthermore, the really long-term effects of mood variation are hard to capture experimentally. The most traceable emotion that is fear, but that's kind of ethically sketchy, and also it's kind of sketchy because it relies a lot on self-report. Okay. Given that self-report is not always a reliable measure of emotional responses, it is crucial to develop objective measures of experienced arousal. And so here comes in valence or pleasantness. Objective measures of experience, arousal, and valence, which is pleasantness, and also arousal. One measure of arousal, so this is only arousal, is skin conductance, which is SCR, which tracks sweat gland activity, reflecting synaptic nervous system activation. Okay. Another physiological measure that is modulated by valence, which is pleasure, rather than arousal, is the emotional modulation startle response, or startle reflex, and typically measured via the eye blink reflex to a sudden onset sound, a mildly unpleasant burst of white noise. The current emotional state of the organism affects the amplitude of this response. So if you're upset, that little like blip of white noise is probably going to upset you more. In particular, negative valence, example fear, potentiates the startle reflex, whereas positive valence attenuates it. So if you're happy, you're not going to get as startled by like that jump. Like imagine laughing with your friends and then you hear a gunshot. You're not going to be as scared as if you were alone in your room and you hear a gunshot, like your eyes are going to shoot open, you're going to like stand up straight and be terrified. Okay. Theories of emotional organization. Categorical theories regard each emotion as a separate entity and typically distinguish between a few basic emotions. These include anger, sadness, happiness, fear, disgust, and surprise. And these are cross-cultural. Okay, dimensional theories view each emotion as falling on a continuum, and so it's like a four quad chart, and the y-axis is valence, so pleasantness, and then the x-axis is arousal, so it's valence and arousal, so like how happy it makes you and like how much it like is like the arousal. Okay, so arousal and happiness, so that's pretty sex oriented. Okay, example, the influential circumplex module, and so that's that little quad thing. Discovers where they fall on two orthogonal axes: pleasant to unpleasant, calm to excited. Okay, so that's what that valence to arousal is, actually calm to excited and pleasant to unpleasant. Dimensional theorists are interested in uncovering neural correlates of valence and arousal, whereas categorical theorists might look for discrete neural relations to each basic emotion. Okay, so categorical are trying to distinguish between the 6 emotions, whereas dimensional theorists, they're just kind of looking like what correlates with something more happy, what correlates with something more arousing. Okay, most recent component process theories view emotion as dynamic, an interaction between various processes that are related to a person's appraisal of the event. Important determinants of emotional reaction are the event's inherent pleasantness, novelty, goal significance, and one's coping potential. More recent competent process theories view emotion as dynamic interactions between various processes that are related to a appraisal of the event. Important determinants of an emotional reaction are the event's inherent pleasant, okay, it's the same thing. Okay, new section, model of emotional generation and its neural substrates. Okay, generation of emotion can be broken down into 3 stages. First, evaluation of sensory input. Second, the experience of a feeling, so fear if the input is a bear running towards you. 3, the expression of a physiological and behavioral response. You run away from the bear. Different models agree with how these stages relate to each other conceptually, anatomically, and temporally. Okay, generation of emotion. Do we run from a bear because we're afraid of it, or are we afraid because we run? Counterintuitively, William James. So James. Remember that Asian lady that was talking about James and running away from a bear after you're, or running away from a bear before you experience fear. Remember that Asian lady. She was talking about James. We are fearful as a consequence of the bodily changes associated with an emotion, not the other way around. The emotion is a result of a brain interpreting the feedback from changes in body state. So again, that's the, you run away from a bear, and because of the running, you're scared. And again, that's what that Asian lady explained. Just think of a bear named James, and that Asian lady is also named James. Okay, this model stems from the late 19th century and is now known as the James Lange feedback theory of emotion. James Lange. So James Lange, that's the bear's name. Okay. The idea that brain interprets bodily arousal to guide decisions has recently been revived into the somatic marker theory. of Damasio. Okay, so James Lang turned into somatic marker theory of Damasio. The idea is that when one sees a stimulus that has previously been linked to a bad outcome, the body subconsciously elicits a somatic response. Okay, so if you already know that the bear is dangerous, then like the body is going to automatically make you run, which is then employed as a guide for behavior. Avoid the stimulus. Damasio contends that the neural substrate for the somatic marker is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Okay. And so Damasio kind of revamped the James Lang thing and said that, like, if you recognize what it is, like, your body's going to have an intuitive fear response and maybe run. And so that's the revamped James Lang backwards type thing. And he's saying that the VMPC is where this all originates, which is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Okay. The Iowa gambling task. Damasio had substance. Okay, so this is Damasio's card test where his subjects intrinsically learn which pile of cards is good and which one is bad. And then when they reach for the bad one, they, like, intuitively produce SCRs, which are the skin potential, like, nervous thingies as they're reaching for the bad card, and they learn to not avoid the bad card. Or they learn to avoid the bad cards. In 1920, Cannon and Bard argued against the James Lang model, suggesting that the automatic nervous system responses are much too undifferentiated, very similar across quite dissimilar emotion states, and too slow to give rapid rise to distinct emotions. Instead, they argued that the body brought a prototypical flight or flight. Okay, so what's going on now is James Lang had the backwards bear theory, Damasio said that it's like an intrinsic response, and then Cannon and Bard, which kind of sounds like Cameron Brooks, came up with the flight or flight model. So Cannon and Bard, and you can kind of think of that as like a cannon and like a bard, so like a barge or like a fence or something like blocking, because it's trying to get you away from fear with the fight or flight thing, and it's like the most powerful one yet because fight or flight is what we still use. Okay. And he was saying that Damasio's was much too slow. Okay, they found surgical experiments that cats could show bodily emotion reactions only if decortication. So if you took the cortex out, was performed above the level of the diencephalon, thalamus, and hypothalamus. It was also found that the electrical stimulation of the hypothalamus could elicit a sham rage in cats. Okay, so if you fake stimulate the hypothalamus, you'll get a sham rage in cats. They'll get mad for no reason. Okay, these findings led to the Cannon-Bard or diencephalic. So Cannon-Bard, diencephalic. So Cameron Brooks, diencephalon, because he likes to run and be athletic. So cephalic, and also phallic, because dick. Theory of emotion proposed that emotional stimulus is first processed by the diencephalon, which then signals simultaneously to the peripheral autonomic nervous system, eliciting behavior, and to the neocortex, eliciting feelings. Okay, and so basically what he's saying here, the Cannon-Bard or diencephalic theory is saying that emotional stimulus first goes through the diencephalon, and then it goes to the autonomic nervous system, which like makes you run away or something, and then it goes to emotion in the neocortex. Generation of emotion in the 1930s, James Papez extended the neuroanatomy of Cannon-Bard model by focusing on the monosynaptic connections of the hypothalamus. And this famous Papez circuit, the Papez cingulate gyrus is associated with conscious feelings, which can be triggered via two routes, neocortical stream of thought or subcortical stream of feeling. Okay, so he's just saying that the cortex goes to the cingulate gyrus. Papez says the cortex goes to the cingulate gyrus, and then that elicits emotion. The cingulate in turn projects back to the hypothalamus via the hippocampus to close the circuit. Okay, so James Papez, that kind of sounds like a carnival ride, and so it's kind of like a carnival ride. It goes from cortex to cingulate gyrus to hippocampus to hypothalamus to thalamus, and then back around again. But it all kind of goes around the thalamus. Like, it has to do with the thalamus and the hippocampus and the cingulate gyrus, and it just kind of goes around. And also the cingulate gyrus is for conscious feelings, and so again, you can think of that gyrus spinning on motion, and then hippocampus, and then the hypothalamus is for physiological expression. Okay, and hypothalamus is also mammalian bodies. I guess that makes sense because hypothalamus kind of sounds like a mammal or like an animal. But around the same time, Kluver and Busey described what we now call Kluver-Busey syndrome, namely after removing the medial temporal lobe. Kluver-Busey kind of, those do sound like two sexually deviant, like a sexually deviant couple or something, would exhibit a loss of fear and hypersexuality. Removing the medial temporal lobe. So remove the MTL, which is, I thought, what HM got removed, and then that exhibited a loss of fear and hypersexuality. Later works established that it was specifically the amygdala damage which caused these behaviors. Okay, so damage to the amygdala, and you become clever and boosy. Okay, so Kluver, it's kind of like clever sexual deviant. So damage to the amygdala, and you become a sexual deviant, and you don't have fear. Okay, starting in the 1950s, Paul MacLean built on these earlier insights to develop fully fledged limbic system theory of emotion. MacLean added to the Papez circuit some subcortical nuclei, parts of the basal ganglia, the amygdala, and the orbitofrontal cortex, and called this the visceral brain, and later the limbic system. Okay, and so now moving on, contemporary views on neurobiology of emotion. Okay, current day research is somewhat split. The basic label concept of limbic system has been reinstated in a revised form and is often used in papers and in books, but many researchers doubt. Okay, so we don't really know if the limbic system is still valid. Within the revised limbic system, a distinction has been drawn between the ventral belt, shown in blue, that is more closely involved in emotional function, and the dorsal belt, that is involved in more cognitive. Okay, so the dorsal belt is more cognitive. Again, remember that little dolphin that's carrying thoughts to the island. And the limbic, or the ventral belt, which again is like good for outputting stuff and the emotion is flowing out. The ventral belt is more for emotion, and this is within the revised limbic system. So it's like two kind of little mini systems. One of them for cognition, which is dorsal, and then ventral is more for emotion. Okay, however, many researchers argue the whole limbic system theory is outdated altogether, and like there's too many things that are not emotional in there, and many cortical regions are known to be crucial for emotional learning, and those aren't included, and so they're saying that that's garbage. Contemporary vertical integration models therefore tend to focus more on the interactions of limbic and other regions, including the brainstem and neocortex. Okay, so brainstem and neocortex, as they were saying, the cortex is a lot involved in emotion, and then getting the brainstem in there, that's like the vertical integration model, I suppose, because the brainstem is below and you're going up. And so it's all combined for emotion. These models are based on a vast literature of fear conditioning animals, which has delineated a complex circuitry of regions involved in acquiring, extinguishing fear in rodent models, which seem to have good applicability to humans. Okay, so this like new integration model is based on a lot of fear conditioning stuff, and it's basically just integrating vertically, obviously, the brainstem and the neocortex with like the limbic system, which is in the middle. Neocortex is on the top, brainstem is on the bottom, and like you're just like going up, basically. Okay. Learning from events that elicit emotional responses is key for survival. The neural circuitry of classical Pavlovian fear conditioning has been mapped out in rodent studies, and it starts with fear acquisition, fear extinction, and context conditioning. Okay, so start with acquiring the fear, then the fear goes away, and then the context conditioning. Okay, that seems out of order, but conditioning's at the end. That's weird. So get the fear, lose the fear, condition the fear. Condition the context, I guess. The acquisition of fear conditioning to a CSUSC pairing has been shown to involve the thalamus, amygdala, and neocortex. That makes sense because the thalamus was in the POV like circuit one. The amygdala is in the sexually deviant one, which is Kluver and something that starts with a B. And the neocortex was in the vertical integration model. And of these, the most crucial site for fear learning and where fear memories are likely to be stored is a lateral nucleus of the, okay, so not lateral nucleus of the amygdala. Okay, so fear lives in the amygdala, and that makes sense because when you cut it out, you stop having fear of like weird sexual encounters, and like you start putting snakes in your mouth. Apparently, if you're the monkey in the picture, animals with lesion to this region do not condition well at all. Okay, so if you cut out that amygdala again, they're like sexually deviant and they aren't scared of anything. Okay, fear extinction repeatedly present in the absence. Fear extinction is thought to involve the formation of extinction memories in association with the CS. What is CS? Oh, conditioned stimulus, is thought to formation of extinction memories with the conditioned stimulus. This process seems to rely in part on the inhibition of the amygdala response, which is mediated by top-down from the VMPC. Okay, so inhibit the amygdala, and then you get like these extinction memories. Okay, damage to the VMPC impairs extinction. Okay, damage to VMPC impairs extinction. Oh dang, okay. So VMPC, if it's not working, your fear extinction won't work, and that's a reason that PTSD happens because of a hypoactive VMPFC. VMPFC. That kind of looks like a soldier thing. So PTSD, damage to it will turn into PTSD because it's inhibiting the amygdala, which is full of fear. Okay, and fear conditioning. In fact, the fear conditioning extinction circuit appears to be severely impaired in PTSD. Patients have difficulty extinguishing conditioned fear responses to cues previously paired with mild shock, and they display a hyperactive amygdala and a hypoactive VMPFC during the extinction phase. And Milwad did all of that. Okay, so context conditioning is highly important for avoiding repeated exposure to negative events. Unsurprisingly, it is important for the hippocampus to the amygdala. It is the input from the hippocampus to the amygdala that is crucial for this form of learning. Okay, so you need to go from hippocampus to amygdala, and amygdala is the center of fear for this form of learning. Patients with hippocampal damage condition normally to unconditioned stimulus and conditioned stimulus pairing, but fail to associate the relationship with any contextual cues. Okay, so they condition, but they like can't relate it like any farther. Okay, and that's a wrap.